Cheers to the man who's going off the market. Miguel yelled on top of his voice in excitement and ordered Rex to open another bottle of wine. Rex glanced at his watch and replied, "No more alcohol. Keep your eyes on the road." Miguel ignored him, searching for the wine bottle. "Brother-in-law, today is your wedding day, and you were supposed to get drunk. Hey, pay attention on the road." Rex scolded him. "I think you ought to stop and let me take the wheel." Miguel scowled. "No way." His eyes were still in the car but kept darting back and forth on the road ahead. "My sister is going to kill me if I let you drive on your wedding day," he said. "Be careful," Rex yelled, but by the time Miguel turned to look back on the road, it was too late. A young boy was crossing the street, and in an attempt to avoid him, the car veered to the left and struck an old woman who was standing by the side of the road. As a result, the vehicle underwent 2 complete flips before coming to a stop on its side. Everything came to a stop as Rex opened his eyes to the sounds of screams and cries for rescue. He could feel his head ringing and felt blood dripping down his face. Everything happened so fast in flip seconds. However, he needed to get out of the vehicle. Despite his efforts, the door was jammed. When he turned to glance around, Miguel was nowhere in sight.
Miguel,
He called out. "Miguel, are you okay?" Outside, Miguel stood in front of the car, his eyes darting around as if possessed. As he turned to look around, he spotted the old woman lying in a pool of her own blood on the side of the road. Fear set in as soon as some vehicles stopped on the opposite side of the road. The old woman looked dead, though he did not have the guts to check. "Fuck!" he cursed, brushing his hands through his hair. Inside the car, Rex attempted to exit the vehicle, but the door was jammed on his side. He kept looking at the driver's seat, but there was no sign of Miguel. With his body in agony, he wriggled to the driver's seat as a small crowd gathered around the accident scene. "That is the driver," one of the pedestrians shouted. Some people hurriedly assisted Rex in exiting the vehicle while some shouted and questioned why he did not stop at the pedestrian crossing. "My brother-in-law." Brother-in-law, Rex kept mumbling to himself while his eyes kept darting around. Despite his best efforts, he failed to spot Miguel, and by now, a large crowd was surrounding him. The ambulance and police officers arrived shortly after. To his surprise, he was identified as the driver by the crowd. But before he could explain, his head felt a stinging sensation that rendered him unconscious. When he opened his eyes, the white ceiling was staring back at him. He attempted to move, but the handcuffs that were fastened to his right hand held him back. Confounded, he tugged on the cuff once more. "My love, you are awake," Rex's fiancée, Chelsea, shouted, giving him a hug. Rex sighed in relief. Hearing her beautiful voice somehow calmed him down. She let go of him and pulled back her short blonde hair. He could tell that she was not wearing her wedding gown but rather regular clothes. Her blue eyes continued to flit about, dodging his gaze. "Chelsea, what's going on? Why am I being cuffed?" he inquired. "Relax, everything will be resolved," she said in response. What is going on, Chelsea? And your brother, where is he? Is he fine, right?" Chelsea sat down and started crying while wiping her eyes. "Is Miguel okay?" Rex was now panicking. He turned, his eyes darting around the room, and spotted Chelsea's cousins and stepmother avoiding eye contact. "Someone tell me what's going on," he yelled. Chelsea began pleading. "You have to save Miguel. He has a pending assault case and was caught for drunk driving last month." Rex paused for a second, trying to figure out what she was getting at. Chelsea's cousin finally clarified. "Since you don't have any alcohol in your system, you have to tell the police you were the one driving." Rex looked up at her as a heavy weight pressed down on his stomach. He slowly turned to face Chelsea, his mouth agape in horror. Chelsea let out a cry. "You've got to save my brother. He's going to spend years in prison for killing that old woman." Rex lifted his body in a sitting position, oblivious to the handcuffs on his right. "What? Did she die?" Rex gasped in horror. Chelsea instantly clutched Rex's hand and said, "My uncle has people messing with the brakes, so it will be the car at fault and not you." She was firmly holding on to his hand as he attempted to shove her away, but her grip was very tight. He continued staring at her in shock as she went on explaining and said, "The case will be a manslaughter charge, and with your clean record, the worst you can get is 1 year." Noticing the shocked reaction, Chelsea sobbed, "For our love, Rex, my brother is not fit for prison life and has a lot of warnings. He will get life." With all his might, Rex pushed on her, finally getting her off his hand. "Where is Miguel?" he yelled. Chelsea's eyes averted, and to his horror, she retorted, "At home, he's in shock and needs rest." Rex's jaw hung in shock. She wanted him to shoulder the blame for a man who could not even man up to ask for the sacrifice himself. He swallowed and asked, "Has he communicated with the police? This is how you support our love and commit to my family." Chelsea seized his hand once more and added, "You said you loved me, and this is how you will express it." "Chelsea," he yelled at her. She gave him the assurance again. "My uncle knows the judges and will make sure you don't serve time." "Chelsea, this is murder we're talking about," she clarified. "An accident, manslaughter, love. And then after all this is over, we can get married." If your brother had kept his eyes on the road, the accident might have been prevented. Rex lost it. "No, you allowed him to drive even though you knew he was drunk." "Melissa," Chelsea's cousin pointed out. Chelsea swiftly stood up and requested everyone to leave the room. Melissa added, "We don't have time, Chelsea. He needs to corroborate Miguel's account because the police officers are coming over to question him shortly." "Miguel has already spoken to the police?" Rex asked, looking up at her. Chelsea sat back down and gave the cover story's details. Rex was meant to admit he was the one behind the wheel and that Miguel was the passenger when the brakes failed. "Or better yet, just tell the police that you don't remember anything," Melissa suggested. Rex was caught out of words. He could not believe what the woman he loved was suggesting. Chelsea's stepmother cleared her throat. "Talk to your family before you make a decision," she advised. "Shut up, Selena," Chelsea yelled and asked her to leave. She had no idea what the useless, gold-digging fool was doing in the room. Selena was her late father's widow, but there was only a 5-year difference between the two. And because of her father's useless will, they were forced to split half of all the properties, which included the mansion they shared. Rex looked for his phone and responded, "Yes, I have to call Dad and my brother. They won't understand love, so no. God is putting our love to the test, and we must decide for ourselves," Chelsea insisted. Selena rolled her eyes and left the room. The cousins followed suit. Chelsea put her palm on Rex's cheek. "Do you love me?" "Of course I do, you are my world," Rex replied. "If my brother gets pinned for this accident, I will kill myself," she said, getting up. "I can't force you to do something against your will. I just thought since you love me and Miguel is your friend, you would understand," she added with the intention of walking out of the room. "Chelsea, no, what are you saying? Do not say such stupid things," he yelled at her. The door opened, and the police officers walked in. Chelsea walked out without saying a word or giving him eye contact. He wanted to believe she was joking, but she was not the joking type. The police officers introduced themselves and explained the gravity of the case. "Were you in the driving seat, Mr. Grayson?" one of the officers asked. Rex looked at them, confusion evident on his face. He kept looking at the door and asking the officers to check on his fiancée. "Mr. Grayson, we are waiting for a reply," the officer insisted. "I do not remember," he replied. The two officers looked at each other, then at Rex, who was visibly shaking and sweating. "Are you saying you do not remember getting in a car and driving off?" the officer asked. Rex nodded. "So you were drunk? Or were you on some drugs?" No, it was the brakes." The coarse voice escaped from his mouth as he closed his eyes and lay back on his bed. Even though he wasn't sure if Chelsea would be able to save him, he was left with no other option after hearing the love of his life mention suicide. 2 weeks later, when the matter was presented in court 2 weeks later, Chelsea was, however, nowhere to be seen. Waiting for the verdict, Rex sat by his attorney. His father, brother, and sister were the only members of his family present. While the court proceedings were going on, he kept gazing behind him, hoping Chelsea would appear. His head was a mesh of jumbled wires. The judge read out the sentencing, and the phrase, 5 years in prison, brought him back to reality. "What?" he whispered. "You are lucky, Mr. Grayson. Your friends get 10 years. 5 is good," the lawyer said to him. "For good behavior, you might get out in 3 years. 5, Rex whispered as he turned to face his family, who were in tears. As she waited for the lawyer's call, Chelsea sat with her family. She kept pacing the room, her hands shaking and her heart pounding against her chest. Selena broke the tension, saying, "You should have gone to court to show your support. The love of your life just gave his life to save your crazy brother." Chelsea turned and stopped pacing around. She screamed, "Stop talking if you don't know what the word family means to you." Her phone rang. It was finally the lawyer, and she answered it in a flash. "Okay, thank you," and turned to face the family. "They gave him 5 years," she announced. "That's great. Better than 10 years. Miguel joked and grabbed himself some wine as if the news he received was worth celebrating. Chelsea looked away, not sure how to react. 5 years was a lot of years for her to wait for a man. She always wanted to get married in her 20s. "So Chelsea, are you back on the market?" Her stepmother smiled. Chelsea glared at her and walked out of the room. At the courthouse, Rex sat in his chair as he waited to be escorted to the prison to start his 5-year sentence. His family were allowed to say goodbye, but his mind was elsewhere and he could not hear what his father was saying. "Rex? Rex?" He finally snapped out of his thoughts. "Chelsea?" he asked. "She is not feeling very well and could not make it," his sister replied. "Oh," Rex gasped, uncertain how to react. His family was still in the dark and were unaware that he accepted responsibility for the accident that he did not cause. He intended to inform them after the ruling, which, in Chelsea's words, would be a year, but after hearing 5 years, he was at a loss. Even if she was truly unwell, she could have sent the brother he gave his life for, he thought. The officers approached the family, urging them to wrap up. It was time to move Rex to the transferring vehicle. Sydney, Rex's sister, began crying. They were dependent on Rex. He was their sole breadwinner. She persisted in sobbing, "No, this is not right." Without addressing his family or making eye contact, Rex stood up. He had made a huge mistake by agreeing to shoulder the blame. It began to dawn on him. However, it was too late to speak up. "Rex!" As they led him outside, his sister screamed. He was just about to get in the car when Chelsea popped up out of nowhere. She shouted out, "My Rex, my Rex!" She wore a headscarf and large, dark sunglasses. The police officers shoved her away, instructing her to get out of their way. Rex looked up. "I will find a way to get you out, my love. Don't worry," she promised him. Rex stared at her. The sunglasses made it difficult for him to see whether she meant the words or not. "Move," the officer said from behind him. Rex looked away and got into the vehicle. He was going to be punished for a crime he did not commit by serving 5 years. Even if he was released on good behavior, his name would still be stained because he was a convicted criminal in the eyes of the law. He wouldn't get a job, and Chelsea waiting for him would be a miracle. Her lack of attendance at the trial and the disappearance of the foolish brother that he last saw before the car flipped gave him a hint. He kept beating himself up as the car drove off, drowning in self-pity. When the car abruptly stopped as it approached the prison gate, sending a screeching sound that startled him out of his reverie. He looked around at the officers that sat in the back with him. They were as confused as he was. One of them radioed the officer driving, but he was blank too. "Get out of the vehicle now," a voice yelled from outside. Rex's heart began beating fast, his eyes peering about trying to understand what was going on. The officer seated next to him received an order from his radio and quickly opened the door. Rex looked up to find men dressed in all black. Once inside, they gave everyone the command to exit the vehicle. Rex couldn't keep up with what was going on because it was all happening so fast. They pushed him to the ground outside the car together with the officers, and they were instructed not to look up as he and the other officers were searched. Rex's eyes, nevertheless, were frantically scanning the area in search of an exit. A nightmare that began on his wedding day was developing into a night terror. As soon as he heard more footsteps walking toward him, he shut his eyes and covered his face. Big hands pulled on his hair and lifted his head. "Who is this?" An icy voice asked the officers. "A convicted reckless driver." The officer lying next to Rex replied. "Holy shit," the voice said. The second he glanced at Rex's face. Hashtag, 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 hashtag chapter name. Chapter 4. Rex gently opened his eyes to find one of the men in black gazing at him in astonishment. The other teammates turned, gazing at him too. One of them instructed, "Send a photo to the boss." Rex noticed the men trembling as one of them moved forward and took a picture of him and forwarded it to their boss. He dialed his phone, and the man laughed, saying, "He is a total photocopy." He ended the call and headed back toward his teammates. He explained, "The boss wants us to bring him in." "What is going on?" Rex finally found his words. "On the floor," the man who was holding him by the hair ordered. The transporting officers looked up and began protesting. "Where are you taking him? This is a convicted criminal." One of them spoke up, "Your bosses will fill you in, but this man is now government property." One of the men in black stated, showing his ID. The officers read the badge that read NSA, "We are looking for a spy who is believed to have hidden in one of the incoming cars." They explained and ordered the security officers to leave. The two officers got up staring at each other and then at Rex, who was begging them not to leave. Between the two teams, he preferred his odds with the officers. One of the officers' phone beeped. It was his boss ordering him and his team to leave the convict in the hands of the NSA. "Hey, wait." Rex was almost crawling. The two men in black grabbed him and threw him into their vehicle as they drove off. Rex was on the edge of crying, could feel his wet eyes. He was positive he had just soaked his pants. The car continued to move for what seemed like an eternity. The three men in black drove without speaking, and when they arrived at their destination, they took Rex out of the car while covering his head with a black sack. He struggled to see where they were hauling due to the darkness of the bag over his head. When the pulling finally stopped, he was forcefully pushed onto the seat. He could hear footsteps leaving the room. He had no idea where he was or their intentions of taking him with them. He heard footsteps again as the door opened. When the black bag was taken off his head, he was finally allowed to take in his surroundings. He was sitting in a chair with a small table in the center of the room. He turned his head, and a man in a suit, with white hair, medium height, and a file in his hand, stood behind him. The man gave him a long, hard stare. "According to the information we acquired while you were in transit, you are Rex Grayson, 23 years old, and you were found guilty of careless driving causing the death of an old woman," the old man said. Rex went on staring at the old man. "If you are Rex, then who is this?" Throwing a file on the table, the old man asked. Rex returned to the table and looked at the file, where he caught sight of a photo of himself. It was his face, but based on the setting and the clothing, it was most definitely not him. As he browsed the file, scanning back and forth between the old man and the pictures, his eyes nearly burst their sockets. The old man finally sat down and introduced himself as Peter Banks, director of NSA. "Yes, what I thought too when a photo of you was sent to me," he said. "We are running DNA as we speak, but we do not have time," he added. "This is not me," Rex's voice mumbled. "Yes, that is Agent Chad, and his body is lying in our mortuary. Killed yesterday, of course, but he was assigned a very important mission that only his face has access to," the director explained. "Vous êtes. In short, we need your pretty face," the director smiled. "You have two options here. We can either send you back to prison to start your 5-year sentence, or we will put you on a plane to Israel and replace our dead agent." The director smiled again. Rex stared at the man, trying to grasp what he meant. "We are offering you a job to work for the NSA in exchange for not serving your 5-year sentence," the old man offered. Rex paused his thoughts, waiting for the man to declare everything was a joke and that they were playing a sick joke on him. However, the elderly man had a serious face on. The director's phone beeped. "DNA says you are not related, so you must be a doppelganger," he said, and ordered Rex to make a decision. "Everything is a joke, right?" Rex finally spoke. The man warned, "Mr. Grayson, with your pretty face, men will make a meal out of you. Therefore, my advice is to sign a contract with us." Rex swallowed hard, asking the man to show him his ID. He understood he already said who he worked for, but he needed to be sure. The director removed his badge and gave it to Rex. "What exactly does the NSA do?" he asked. "More like the CIA, but we have jurisdiction in the country and way above them." The old man smiled. "So if I get this job, I will not save time?" The old man smiled again. "Yes, and I think we are wasting time discussing your doubts," the director said and removed a contract from his file. "You go to Israel or you become someone's wife in prison," he joked. Rex got up, nervously moistening his dry lips. Desperation etched its way into every crease. "Sit down, Grayson," the man ordered. Rex's hands twitched spastically. He was all sweaty and his breathing ragged. The deal in front of him was too good to be true. "Mr. Grayson, your decision. We have other candidates waiting for this opportunity," the old man insisted. Rex looked at the contract again. One did not trust the man, but one thing was right. He was going to be turned into everyone's bitch plus a punching bag in prison. But I have no experience. I work in an office job," he stated. "Your first assignment will not need any skill. Just show up at a restaurant. The person will confirm your face and hand you a briefcase." The man explained. "Restaurant?" Rex asked. "Yes, in Israel, full of customers. The person only trusts Chad," the director emphasized and pulled the contract from Rex's hand. Rex pushed it back. He had taken a fall for a crime he did not commit, so he was not going to let a miracle pass him. As it stood, he was already a dead man in the prison walls. "Pen, he set out. The director handed him a pen and he quickly signed it. For unknown reasons, he felt like the weight of the 5-year sentence he was given lifted off him. The director grabbed the contract, placed it in his file and asked him to wait. Rex watched as the man walked out of the room. He let out a sigh, wondering what was going to happen next. The door opened and a woman dressed in what appeared to be military walked in with the director following from behind. "This is not going to work," she said, staring at Rex. "He looks like a scared kitty." She got closer. "And he does not smell like Chad but smells of piss." She turned away. Rex looked away embarrassed. "Prep him up and make him look and smell like Chad," the director ordered, walking out of the room. The woman rolled her eyes and asked Rex to get up. "Hurry up, we only have 2 hours," the woman said. Rex quickly got up and was taken to a bathroom where he was ordered to shower up. After he was done, a hairstylist was brought in to make him look very identical to the late Chad, and he was finally put in a suit and handed a briefcase. Rex stood in front of the mirror in an expensive tailored suit and a slicked-back haircut, unable to recognize himself. The woman walked back into the room, this time with a smile. "A jet will take you to Israel, and a man will pick you up at the airport," she ordered. "What? Now?" Rex asked. "You blow your cover, we send you back to jail," the woman warned. Rex swallowed hard, his heart on the verge of bursting out. "The mission is simple. The driver will drop you at the restaurant, and you are to sit in the back seat and wait for a woman dressed in white," she explained. "The woman will hand you a briefcase, and you are to hand her yours," she added and warned him not to say any words to the woman. Rex nodded, and before he knew it, he was in Israel getting picked up by the driver and was already in his seat at the restaurant. He was shaking, his heart was practically in his hands. The door opened and a woman in white with a briefcase walked in and sat from across the table. He quickly handed her his briefcase, but to his horror, she pointed a gun at him under the table and asked for the safe word.